the known impacts, and what are some of the budget drivers and assumptions that we are preliminarily planning for, looking at our general fund preliminary budget, and then, of course, the important dates leading up to the budget adoption in September. So when you look at our budget development process, it all starts with forecasting. So back in November, around the November-December holiday time, we begin to look at enrollment forecasts for the upcoming year. That leads into a process where we develop some models for staffing for the upcoming year. We plan out throughout January, February, and March what the staffing allocations will look like at the district level through our school-based sites, and we determine, based on those projections, how many staff we will need. In April and June, we really kind of drill down and look at what we call our zero-based budget departments budget. So we look at everyone's department budgets, what expenditures have historically happened on a reoccurring basis, what are we anticipating to be expenditures for the upcoming year, are there any contracts, renewals, or any state mandates that we need to plan for, and every department basically starts from scratch, but looks at their historicals to develop their departmental budgets for the upcoming school year. Around this time, we just ended our budget session at the legislative level. And so now we have a clearer picture of what our revenue will be looking like from the state. So we look at all of the legislative changes, any changes to categorical funding, and what our estimates are. And that is the point where we're at now. We'll come back next month and we'll be presenting a tentative budget for review. And also the millage will be advertised for board approval in July. We'll continue to make refinements, and August is a very important time. Within the first 5 days, we are looking to see, did our forecast back in November and December match the actual enrollments that we're seeing in the seat at our schools in August? So that first 5 days is really, really an important time, because that's when we begin the second, or really the first round for the year of staffing adjustments. We just, in April and June, or in March, I'm sorry, we did our second round. So then after August and the dust settles, we enrollment and we know exactly what we're dealing with. We'll know what our projected revenue will come. We will bring back the final adjusted budget for adoption along with the millage in September. So some key milestones that have occurred up to this point: we have finalized our zero-based budgeting for each of our departments. We are continuing to monitor our enrollment and our staffing. We are monitoring the results of the legislative session and the impacts that may have any type of financial implications. And then in July, we will receive our taxable values. So we will know a clear picture of what that'll look like in terms of our projections of increases or decreases with the millage referendum and our overall local RLE. We will also receive the second calculation from the state regarding the FEFP, and we'll have a better picture going into the school year of fine-tuning the revenue, and then be presenting the tentative budget this upcoming month in July. Again, like I said earlier, August, we start school. The first 5 days, we really do count. Every single day, we count who has shown up so that we can make accurate predictions for what the revenue will be. And then we adjust from there. Based on that, we will, if we see that a school is increased in the number of students based on what we forecasted, we will adjust staffing towards increasing staffing as appropriate. We have a very specific model and formula in which we use to do that. It is not arbitrary by any means. And then if schools lose enrollment, we also make those adjustments. And so the whole idea around that is potentially have to move existing staff from lower enrolled schools to higher enrolled schools based on projections. So it's not a whole lot of new hiring unless we don't have any existing positions to fill that. So that's when the surplusing and the shifting occurs, which, is not convenient for many people, but it is one of those necessary things that we have to do each and every year. After that settles, we'll bring back for adoption in September the final budget. And we will close out this current school year's budget with the final budget amendment. So looking at our current status right now, everything remains preliminary, and we'll continue to refine this as we receive additional information as it becomes available. But right now, there are some things that we know, things that we have estimated, and things that are pending in terms of our timeline. So we are estimating enrollment, which obviously creates an estimate in staffing, because your enrollment should always align to your staffing. We are estimating our revenue because we don't have every dollar accounted for because taxable values are not done until July, so we still have some time for that. And then we are estimating our final actual expenses. So you know that process there's a couple of months there where we true up everything, our final POs, everything is finalized, and we close out the 25-26 school year. And then what we do know and what is available is the conference report that came out a couple weeks ago. That is the Florida Educational Finance Program budget for our county and for all school districts, and the state budget update. Again, pending at this point is the taxable values. The second calculation will be coming next month, as well as the FES scholarship enrollments, final staffing, and of course, bargaining will be tentative and is pending. So when you look at our general fund trends over the last few years, you can see where our revenues and expenses have lie. So as you look at the last 24 and 25, there has been a shortfall of revenue over the expenses. And so you can see where we have had, and we have all experienced in the last 12 months, the correction period that we have undergone with huge increases in expenses, very sharp increases, whether they be medical benefits, utilities, inflationary cost, everything driving from salaries and all to the revenues, which have come in not quite as where we had hoped for. So that has obviously required us to make some significant adjustments over the course of that year. When we look at our projections for the close out of this particular school year, I want to point your attention down to the financial conditions. So obviously, when we look at the funds available towards what was appropriated for the school year and our ending fund balance, we are projected to close out this particular school year at an 8.65% fund balance. So when you look at our appropriations, I'm very happy to say that we came in significantly under what we projected. We appropriated $682,900,000 in appropriations, and we came under about $4.2 million under that. So we did very well in terms of living within our means and what we said that we would do in terms of our adopted budget. One of the issues that occurred throughout this year is the projected revenue came in much less than anticipated in the adopted budget. So we anticipated revenues of being $764,813,000 when they actually have come in at $758,200,000. So a shortfall of revenue of about almost $6.6 million. So that ending fund balance, of course, is about a $2 million difference, $2.3 million difference as we had adopted back at the beginning of the year. So slightly under what we had hoped for, but in terms of making the adjustments, I'm very, very significantly proud of the team. There's been a lot of work that has happened over the course of this year to really monitor everything. I mean, down to the penny of what's been appropriated, where do we have cost savings, and how do we respond to the shortfall of this revenue that we have experienced. And the team has done an outstanding job in making sure that happens, painstakingly sometimes, so as you go through line by line to ensure that we are saving as much as possible. So what are some of those pressures that we're facing and the drivers? Obviously, we want to continue to meet our board policy and our goal of a 7.5% financial condition each and every year. We're continuing to look at the increase in the impacts of the Florida Empowerment scholarships. We're looking at our taxable values. I can tell you over the last 5 years, there has been some pretty significant large increases in that. We are not anticipating, actually there was a scenario we looked at a projection of actually seeing a decrease. However, we also have seen where there may be a nominal increase of about 1%. So we're going to look at the positive in terms of our planning to get at least the 1%. But again, it is an estimate. So those adjustments will have to occur, whether it becomes in a little slightly less or slightly more. We will know that more in July. Obviously, declining enrollment is an issue. You can see that one of the factors that our revenue was a shortfall is that the projection and the loss of students, I think of about 250 some odd students in one of our calculations happened last year. We do have a new charter school that is opening up in the 26-27 school year. They have projected to open up over 500 students. We don't believe that has come to fruition at this point, but we do have to anticipate what that will have as an impact on our enrollment. We are opening up a new high school down in Welland Park this year, which is a pressure point for us to a degree. And then, of course, the impacts of the legislative session and the FEFP outcomes. One of the things we're looking at in this year, we did do a delay. We did a gap year in our curriculum adoptions as a cost savings measure. Typical adoptions can run you $5 to $8 million, depending on the subject area, the resources that you end up procuring. And we will need to look at that as an option going into next year. We don't want to delay 2, 3, or 4 years. Sometimes that's a viable option. Sometimes that's not, depending on the updates to the curriculum. So we are looking at, in terms of our planning, to proceed with adopting instructional materials next year. Obviously, staffing and retention impacts, that's going to, obviously, we're looking at the teacher salary increase allocation that the state provides, as well as any negotiated terms that we have with our union. And workers' compensation, which we'll dive in a little bit here in a minute, about how that is having a pretty significant impact on us in the coming year. So the next slide that you see here is an estimated enrollment in FTE for comparison to the current school year and estimated for next year. So you can see in our traditional, that is our district managed schools, which we have oversight of, we are projecting almost 400 students in decline from last year. Particularly that's due to the opening of the new charter school, mainly. So you can see that overall charter schools are projected to increase over 262 students. Our virtual school will see a slight decline of about 5 students. Our FES scholarship participation will rise from 4,709 to 5,341. Now that number is determined by the DOE. We can't change it. It is what it is. Will it end up being that? That will be foreseen as we monitor that throughout the year. So while there is an overall increase to student enrollment in FTE for the entire district of 491 students, I want to be very clear that is not an increase to the district side, the district managed side of things. When we look at our projected staffing for the 26-27 school year, this is where we obviously did some alignment as we saw that the revenues were not keeping up with the pace of expenses. We did some very significant things over the course of the year. We looked at adjustment to our benefits plan. We looked at staffing significantly, and we looked at all of those non-recurring expenses expenses that were put on non-recurring funds. And we made those adjustments moving into this year. And this particular one is focused on staffing. And as you can see, beginning the 25-26 school year compared to our estimates, where those changes lie in terms of total staffing reductions by category. Obviously, the bulk of our staff, over 3,000 of them, were in instructional, over 2,800 in classified, and we had 278 administrators, going down for a total of 294 positions. Remember, in our administrative category here, 126 of the 258 going into next year are district, as well, and then 132 of them are our school-based. So that's principals and assistant principals. So if you look at the conference report, we want to look at, well, what changed for us? What happened? So we did see, obviously, our FTE unweighted has increased, which we've explained. That is not necessarily to the bottom line of our district managed schools. Our student-based allocation rose $85. And for total funds per unweighted FTE, we saw an overall increase of $47.09. There was a nominal change in our mental health allocation, nothing major. Our ESC guaranteed allocation rose. Our safe schools allocation pretty much remained flat. We saw about a $400,000 decrease in student transportation, as well as a $400,000 decrease in class size adjustments. When we look for the adjustments for the FES scholarship, we are moving from $45 million to over $52 million. So that is about close to $7 million increase. But the state-funded discretionary supplement, which is used to offset some of that, was at 1.6. So you're still looking at about a $5.2 million impact going into this year due to the Florida Empowerment Scholarship. So this is just another way to look at the highlights overall from the state level, just that there was an increase of $85 to the base student allocation. However, half of that increase is earmarked for the teacher salary allocation increase. And what I want to make sure everyone understands, that is not a separate categorical. That is part of the FEFP. That is part of our general revenue coming in. One nuance that is changing this year as compared to previous years in the TSIA, which is the teacher salary instructional increase allocation, is now we need to focus on the 10 years full-time teaching experience in a Florida school up to $3,000, and then any increases beyond that we can help with other personnel compensation. The big change here, obviously, there's a focus on 10 years. It doesn't mean that we cannot look at negotiating for other outside of that, but we do need to prioritize the 10 years. And not every dollar must go to, is the interpretation of the statute here from several legal people that I've spoken to, and the Florida School Board Superintendent Association have said. But what we have to do is we have to have done this in a very accelerated timeline. So the budget for the state is implemented and begins implementation on July 1st. And the law now says that under this accelerated timeline, the TSIA is a financial urgency, and districts must bargain the impact of that urgency. And we have to do that we have to begin negotiations by July 15th and conclude them by the 30th of July. So that is a change in the way that we have historically negotiated the TSIA allocation. For us, our school district, that is going to be $3.1 million, but that is not inclusive of, obviously, because it is a part of the FEFP, the impacts to the Florida Empowerment Scholarship, the impacts of charter, all that has to be accounted for. So what is left for district managed to negotiate will be below the $3.1 million. The ESC guarantee allocation had an increase of $94 million across the state, but there was no specific changes to any policy in that. And across the state, while we saw very slight increases, there was no increase to the total allocation for school safety and mental health statewide. All right, so what does that look like for us and our revenue impacts as compared to the fourth calculation for the school district this year? So we'll anticipate a decrease in the required local effort millage. That is moving from a 2.843 to a 2.717. That RLE and discretionary millage only. Our local funding is actually going to be decreasing by $15.5 million. Now, our state funding will increase by $23.7 million, and we will see a decrease of $400,000. That should be a negative beside that, sorry. That negative needs to move down. A negative of $400,000 on the class size. Now, so we saw a slight increase in state funding and an increase in state funding and a decrease in local funding. That is because the bill has changed, the law has changed now that 85% of our funding is local compared to what it used to be. It was 90%. So now 15% is state funding. And remember that the Florida Empowerment Scholarship can only be used with state dollars, not local dollars. And so that threshold has dropped to 85% to increase the state pot. And so our net deductions additional for next year will be another $5.2 million towards the scholarships. So that is a net increase to our general fund of $2.6 million. But here's the thing. That's the net of the entire amount. Because of the enrollment piece, then we're going to see a decline. That doesn't mean we're receiving $2.6 million. Most of that will be passing through to charter schools and not to us because of their increased enrollment. So what are some of the expense assumptions and drivers? So we did see, as you look at our preliminary budget this year, we are planning for the 0.5% retention increase that is outlined in our CBA. That has an impact of about $2.1 million. Our charter school payments are expected to increase this year by $7 million. We do anticipate adopting instructional materials at roughly $5 million. We are seeing and experiencing high cost increases in our food nutrition services as it relates to the cost of food, obviously benefits, all of those things have an impact. It typically has been self-funded, but there has been the implication that we have had to transfer some of our general revenue to help support those increased costs. And our self-insurance fund as well, so that is a total of over $1 million. We're seeing obviously increases like probably everyone's household to utilities of about 4.5%. And then of course our new high school of about $9 million. Now that $9 million is inclusive, I just want to be clear, of the staffing that's involved there. So some of that staff was transferred from maybe a Venice or a Northport, but in general it costs $9 million to support the opening of that school. Where we're seeing some savings, so we did some very significant adjustments to staffing at the end in the spring here. That will net us close to $15 million. Our FRS rates have decreased this year, saving us about $1.2 million. Our initial savings on our health insurance plan, we're projecting a little over $4 million, and that may increase as we get into not as many people migrated in the summer because we'll be back on our rotation in October, and we'll probably experience more migration at that point. But because deductibles and all of that have been met for many of them, I believe that not as many jumped from one plan to another. But I don't think that will hold true. So we may actually end up saving a little more in health insurance over the course of the year as we go through the enrollment period, as we normally do in October and November. Our Title I and ESC supplements, we did renegotiate that in impact bargaining, and that will net us a savings of $3 million. We ended a contract with Synergistics Energy Management, saving us $1 million, and our property insurance premiums will decrease about $300,000. So what does that do for us in particular to our preliminary 26-27 budget? So you can compare that to our actuals. And I'm going to allow Ms. Gabby Jarumchek and the team. I want to thank Krista Kurtner and Cindy Stiglich, who have been working very hard and monitoring this very closely, to just talk a little bit of our preliminary budget compared to our projected actuals for the 25-26 school year. And I'll hand it over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Just taking a look at our adopted budget for 25-26 compared to the projected actuals, and this is information that we have as through May. So obviously, as the year ends, it will change according to what is really transpiring. For our federal funds, we have a little bit less projected there. That has to do with our Medicaid funding. We're not seeing as much as we anticipated. For state resources, that's pretty much coming on target, along with the local, due to the fact that, as we said, we had less revenue from the state for our FEFP because our enrollment went down. So overall, the revenues, that's how they're trending. For the appropriations, the salaries are coming in a little bit better than we budgeted. The benefits as well, because those coincide. For the purchase services in the district, those are increasing a little bit compared to what was budgeted. But if you had last year's actuals there, you would see it's almost exactly status quo. Sometimes funds are budgeted in a different line, like salaries, for hard to fill positions such as SLPs, and then they have to go outside because we have to have those services, and funds get transferred from salaries into purchase services. We also did see an increase in our accelerated academies option as well. Charters almost coming in exactly as budgeted. Energy services, there's a decline there. Proactively, as Mr. Connor was talking about, when the year was being watched and the trends we're seeing, they went ahead and canceled contracts that they could, like Synergistics, to save a little bit of money there. Materials and supplies are coming in a little bit less than what was anticipated. For capital outlay, that's came in a little bit more. We had expenditures such as Welland Park and different capital grants that came through in that line item. Other expenditures almost exactly on target. The transfer to internal services, that's where Mr. Connor's talking about workers' comp. That's coming in more than was anticipated, and you can see that that's trending to the out years as well. And then for the transfer to food nutrition services, that is coming in as expected there. So the main reason is, like he said, because of the revenue being a little bit less, but otherwise it's coming in at 8.65 as anticipated right now. Do you want me to talk about next year?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. You can proceed.
For next year, the preliminary budget. So for the federal resources, to stay conservative so we can make sure that's how we're going to be forecasting. We kept that along lines of how federal was trending this year. And the total state sources, that is a little bit higher. But as we know, that's because they raised the portion that they had to raise in order to cover the scholarships. The local is going down as a result of that, also because our enrollment is declining. So for the appropriations for salaries and benefits, due to the changes in the staffing allocations because of enrollment dropping, there was a savings there. And purchase services for the district, again, is going to be trending a little bit lower. Again, as salaries or positions that are hard to fill have to get moved to that line item, we may see that go up. Then also for purchase services charters, like we said, we have a new charter that is the Classical Academy, and they had forecasted over 500 FTE or students. So we have that forecast in there, as well as we are seeing growth in our Northport Imagine School. So energy services, that is, we saw savings there because the Synergistics contract was dropped. However, FP&O let us know that our rates were going to go up about 4.5%, and plus we're adding on a fully operational high school. So we did have that's almost status quo there. Materials and supplies is going up because we have our adoption. And for capital outlay, that is where the budget is right now until new things get transferred into that. With capital in most cases, it's an in and an out, meaning that if things get put into the general fund, the capital budget transfers funds in to cover that. So, and then the internal services, that trend for workers' comp is increasing, or I guess I should say staying the same. So there is going to be an increase of about $2 million there. And also for general liability as well. That has to transfer from the general fund. And then food and nutrition services is trending a little bit better for next year. Instead of the million, it'll be about 400,000. That's our estimate, which brings us to a financial condition ratio of 7.54 at this moment in time. We will see changes, like Mr. Connor said, the certified tax roll will come right before July. So we're going to be very hopeful that we get a higher percentage there than 1%, because every bit transfers then in to help us out. So we will be waiting for that on July 1st.
All right, so I know that's a lot. And there is one additional piece that we can talk about after. We'll open up for discussion and when you're ready, Chair, but there are some revenue generating ideas that I'd like to just propose. None of this is very significant, but I think we have to look at every option, right? And so as we get through the discussion, I have provided some one-pagers and some data for you for us to discuss around how we go about our facility rentals. I know this is not always popular to talk about, but meal pricing and just knowing that where do we sit in comparison to our peer districts, as well as our fingerprinting costs, which has been pretty significant the last 2 years because of a process where we're mandated to re-fingerprint everyone in the school district. And then, of course, new legislation around athletic participation and charging of fees to be a part of that as well. So we can dive into that, but I'm sure there are questions prior to that related to the budget. But I'll close with this, just some important dates leading up to the adoption. Again, July 1, property appraiser will certify the tax rolls. We'll get the required local millage from the Florida Department of Education on July 19th. We will submit a tentative budget to the board on July 24th. We will advertise that, and then we will adopt the tentative budget and millage on July 28th and receive notification to the property appraiser on August 4th and do our final budget adoption on September 15th. So I'll hand it back over to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I do want to pause and we can continue further discussion, but there is a lot, and I'm sure I see all of us taking notes. So to give each one an opportunity, and we can continue to circle back. So I'm sure there are questions or comments, and I'll open it up to board members and start there. Mrs. Rose.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make a couple questions, a few remarks. I want to start out with the positive, complimenting Superintendent Connor and his staff for putting forth a budget that makes sense, is conservative, and at the same time, you have you've been extraordinary with your staff in strengthening the systems at the district office, and I say that with decades of experience. The systems here are extraordinarily tight, well-run, great leadership, and it's paying off in academic achievement and in innovation plans for our district, and I wholeheartedly compliment you for that piece. A few questions. District-run charters. Is that something that's been thought about? I think that it's time to at least have a discussion on it, and I would propose to my colleagues that it actually become a workshop item. It is a competitive world. It's clear in the data that you presented that the community is interested in options that obviously look like that. I think that I would be, as one individual, interested in the school districts in Florida that are doing that, how it's working, so forth and so on, without giving you a project. So the charters is one piece. The second piece, and I brought this up before, and I'm compelled to bring it up again, you noted, and with great validity, to look at every option. Legal fees. I would be interested in the cost of our legal fees and how that compares to other districts of our size. I know that is a substantial cost, and again, looking at every option to make sure that as a board, or at least as an individual board member, that I'm very conscientious of what I'm supporting. So district-run charters, legal fees, and then the last piece, and this is something I've been asked in the community, and I've heard a few different things myself, but relative to the FRS, the Florida Retirement System, and union workers, employees of the union, is the union directly paying for their FRS costs, or and if they are those running through the district? Do they do that separately? How does that piece function relative to our district? So there's three questions there, and I want to highlight the complement. The systems, I've never observed our systems to be as tight as they are now, and I can't emphasize that enough. And you've done it with such a cost-effective manner.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, the idea around district charters has been something we have been having a lot of discussion about for several months. And in comparison to some districts that have them, there are a couple of frameworks in which you can work a district charter. You can partner with a nonprofit who has already established a charter, and you can be the management company per se as a district, and you enter into an agreement, much like some of these charter schools do, with a management company, and you become the management company, and you set the terms through the agreement of what will be the responsibility of the school district, what will be the responsibility of other entities that may have agreements with the charter. The other option is that we could look at potentially, and this is more rare, I haven't seen many examples of this, but we would look to partner or develop a nonprofit, because charters are run through a nonprofit organization, and then they hold the charter. And so we could look at the what is our options and viability of partnering closely with a nonprofit to develop a system to create a district-run charter. I think for us it would be where could we find value in a district-managed charter to meet the needs of the community and what our parents and our families want, right? So aligning that to the purpose of even going down this path. That's really important. So a little more legwork. We do have some data. We've done surveys about what our parents want, and we want to see what is the return on investment if we travel down a path of district-managed charter. I'm sure there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of unforeseen things that will come along with that. But we also see that there could be potential benefits as well in terms of, as a marketing tool, recapturing students, doing some innovative work with staff, being a little more flexible, because honestly, the requirements statutorily for charters are much less than they are for our traditional schools. So that could give us some flexibility in that area. So I do think it's definitely something we have to continue to look forward to. The obstacles really become to how do we logistically implement that legally. So we're looking through all those options now. When it comes to legal fees, we have done, I just actually know this off the top of my head because we were analyzing this number yesterday or last week. We are currently around $1.8 million in expenses for legal fees up to date. It has been steadily increasing. A lot of that is predicated on ongoing litigations. You know, once something gets into the litigation process, it's very hard to navigate. You got to kind of follow through at that point. So what are those off ramps? And I've talked specifically with our current legal counsel about the things we need to establish as a framework for us, the expectation that we need to be reducing those costs, having cost savings as much as possible, making sure we have quarterly reviews of potential litigations or pre-litigation issues so that we can try to resolve them and have this resolution, looking at software. There is some proprietary AI software that can kind of help you navigate some of these situations as well. So we're looking at that as a potential. But of course, there's always the ability for the board to look at options. What are we providing in terms of services? And we're prepared to have that discussion and prepare for that as the board directs. In terms of FRS, I don't have a clear answer for that currently, but we will research that to make sure we give you the most accurate answer on who is contributing to that for SCTA.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's been an outstanding question out in the community that I would like to provide transparency for. And I also encourage my board colleagues and the chair to the one piece I'm looking for from legal standpoint, legal costs, is comparison to same-size districts. And what that configuration looks like in those districts. That's a sizable amount of money. And when I look at, when I individually and historically, as a public servant in this school district, I not only look at the legal component, but it's been several years now that we have services from one legal firm. How is that partnership, contractual obligation helping us to understand how we can reduce those legal issues you alluded to that have this big question mark that go with them? I would think that I would be looking for a level of expertise that isn't increasing our legal liability but yet decreasing it, being well ahead of it. So I encourage my colleagues with those pieces and compel the chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. No, and I will just on the legal fees component, I will one note that certainly when Mr. Carr had made us aware of some of the financial gaps, I guess, that we were going to be facing. I know he and I met, and that was one of the number one items that I had asked for us to look at, because to me there's so many headwinds that are external variables that we have limited impact or control, for lack of a better term, over. But in my mind, this area is something that we can, with litigation, it's just a function of risk management. There are a lot of things from a systems approach that we can, I believe, deliver to mitigate that. I know he's been having ongoing conversations, but from a broader standpoint, this is not a new thing. And I know that there's a lot of things to juggle, but this is a huge cost. And it really plays a huge role as far as the cultural aspect of, from a risk management function, as well as a financial component, and evaluating what that structure looks like from internal counsel to external counsel and third party. And I know we've talked about this as a board. I think it is important we do this analysis. Mr. Connor and I have certainly talked about it regularly. If the bandwidth exists, that there is some analysis, that it's a cost-benefit analysis that can be presented to the board, not only like-minded districts, because usually there is a general percentage of, based on the entity's size and head count of humans, et cetera, there's a percentage that you would expect to have from a legal expense. But then there are also different structures. And so I know it's a question I think school boards across the country constantly ask, like, do Do you outsource? Do you bring someone in-house? And I believe it's something we need to do. We've talked about it. I think I think there's a lot of moving parts. I think systems have been put in place since Mr. Connor's come here. I'm much more confident in that. And I think it's time to do so. Mr. Connor and I are meeting after today to really set up the rest of the schedule for workshops to make sure we're hitting on those things, but also so that the very important work that you guys are all responsible for, as well as preparing over the summer and the major financial aspects, but these play a very important role. So I absolutely support that. I do think, like I said, there are different nuances. The litigation is overwhelmingly the part of it. It's interesting, workers' compensation, well, that's not necessarily something the legal team handles. It's another area that I think we have opportunity to improve upon. And again, I think now the systems are being put in place, it's a perfect opportunity to do that. So I hear you loud and clear. Mrs. Marinelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Krista, everybody that worked really hard on this budget, because this is not an easy thing. It's never easy, but it's always easier when you get to add money instead of taking it away. But those of us that have worked in this district for a long time, this is not the first budget cuts, and it won't be the last. So let's just hope that we have better wins ahead, that all the work that Superintendent Connor and his staff are doing to be competitive pay off in the next few years. And thank you, Ms. Rose. You covered like 3 of those, and I most definitely am very interested in the district-run charters, because we've been talking on and off almost 3 years. So I think it's time. And yes, I know it's a lot of work, but I have such confidence in your staff, because look what they did to reimagine our schools. So I think this is another thing to be competitive. We have to look at these things. And then on the legal fees, I had down looking at in-house counsel versus out. I know that when you have a larger firm, you have access to other attorneys for different things that a school system goes through, but I think we have to look at what are we getting? What is the school board getting for $1.8 million? That's a lot of money. And I don't know if it'll be any less, but I think we owe it to the taxpayers, to our community, that at least we're looking at it. And I know we talked briefly about, well, the systems have gotten, you've tightened, well, you put them back in place because we didn't have them for many years. But I still think there are some that, which I know you're working on, can be tightened up. And the reason I say that, because that's not what the board we get into, but that's what we talk to you about. I would say, especially at some of our high schools, to make sure that accountability of what is being taught and what is not. Because that's one of the big things that I get from community members, that they're still saying that there are inappropriate things being taught or said to kids, especially in our high schools. And that's your all's job. I'm just bringing it out in open because I think it's something that is still happening. So, and if we're going to be competitive, we've got to hold everybody accountable for what goes on in those buildings. And that is basically my comments and questions. So thank you.
Mrs. Barker.
Thank you. I have a couple questions, and obviously I echo the gratitude for what you all do. I can't even imagine being in those shoes. It's very stressful. I don't know. Do you people sleep? Probably not. Probably not. I don't really either, but I think if I had your job, I would sleep even less. So first question, because we haven't been down to, quite so close to the 7.5 reserves ratio in my memory. If you could tell me, if we're moving to the 7.54, how much of our monthly, weekly expenses does that cover? So, there are districts in Florida right now who are not able to make payroll if they fall below. And my understanding is that monthly expenses for a district fall somewhere around 8%. So I get a little, 7.54. How tight are we there? Being able to make payroll, being able to keep the lights on, if we're down there.
Well, I can tell you that this is a very tight budget. So, and we went through every single line and scrubbed every single line. And everything that was done over the last year was a necessity to be done. They're continuing to look at things. They do have a lot of controls in place to make sure that things stay on target, but it definitely, it is going to be very tight. As far as the revenue, that's part of the goal of keeping it at the 7.5% because not having to go out and borrow to make
Right.
payroll. I would let Gabby speak more to that as far as what that is, but that is the whole intention, to make sure that that keeps us in that situation.
So at the 7.54, we will not have to borrow to make payroll, or that's the plan.
That's the plan, yeah.
Okay.
I don't have that information from me. Like I said, she would have to go back and do that, but that was the original intent of setting it up at that, is to be able to do that. I would just say again, it's very tight, so we need to everybody do their best, stay on target. Mhm.
Thank you. The other thing I noted, and this is kind of my own personal wondering, the RLE that gets reduced every year by the state. And I have heard that, that's to account for the increase in property values. And I would understand that, except that it still decreases even when property values decrease. So my thought is, over the course of the last 15 plus years, we've steadily decreased the RLE. And that's not something the school district has any control over. But does it make sense for that to be something that we have conversations when we're talking about our plan for advocacy for the next legislative cycle? I don't know if there's any appetite in Tallahassee for that, but at least helping our local delegation understand what that loss in revenues from a continually declining RLE does to the budget. So perhaps that's just a note for Mr. Parento and Mr. Connor for next year. And then moving to the district-run charters, that is an interest for me. I'm interested in that. I'm wondering, do we know if any of our current sort of homegrown charters are interested in that sort of partnership as opposed to starting from scratch? Where are we going to find all these children? Eventually, Sarasota only has so many children, and we're not seeing quite the same influx of families that we were at one point in time. So, how many schools can one district really support enrollment-wise? Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yes. And to answer your question, we have engaged with one of our charters. Not a huge interest in wanting for us to assume all responsibility, but they're successful, so I can understand that. But there definitely was interest in some type of collaboration and partnership. So whether that's particular services that we set up agreements for, but not totality of managing day-to-day operations. But there are 14 other ones that we can talk to. I don't know if there's an appetite for that, but it definitely is something that our team will explore.
I found it interesting that we had this uptick of charters, when the sheriff decided that he wasn't wanting to do the resource officers for the charters anymore, and then we were asked to do that, and it led me to think well, what else could we potentially provide to some of our charter partners that would help them do their work better and also work better for us, so whatever that looks like. And then I know some districts in Florida have moved to a full choice model where, everyone gets to choose where they send their children. Once the school's full, it's full. But is there any thought about looking at our own processes around school choice internally and making them more flexible and more friendly to families and allowing our internal families to have more choice, because I think that's really part of what families want is that, ability to say what's best for their kids. So.
Okay, so with the district managed charter, there's a difference in taking over an existing charter and converting it, and then there's starting your own. And to Mr. Connor's point, we did discuss that, but if we're going to take it over, we want to take it over. We like totality of a situation so we can really direct how we want to see that school flourish. And when we think of district managed charter, it's a better option to do something on our own and maybe convert one of our existing schools. Thinking about the programmatics that are in demand for our community, to Mr. Connor's point, all the research we've done is really to look at seeing if that's something we want to bring to fruition in our future focus plan in the future. In addition to having to establish a direct support organization, whether it's partnering with an existing one or something different to ensure that we can manage that charter. So we're absolutely planning all of that, which falls right into the choice conversation. One of the things we are looking at doing coming up in the fall is to start our choice window in October to make sure we're well in front of those decisions for our families, because waiting till February, March, or April is well beyond the point of decision making. Parents are thinking about that all the time. We want to be the first choice, so we have to give ourselves the option to be the first choice by starting and being first, offering our programmatics to our families. And as that starts, then you have many more windows to work through in a more expeditious timeline so that families can plan for the new year well in advance. That would also come with alleviating wait lists all the time, like a rolling enrollment. So there's a lot of work that Mr. Connor's directing us to work through, and we hope to have that new window starting in October of this upcoming school year.
Wonderful. I love it when you're one step ahead of me, because it happens all the time. Thank you. I just briefly, talk to me about workman's comp. What are our options there? What are our thoughts about kind of getting that a little bit under control?
That was great. That was a good tee up, because I actually was like, we need to go a little deeper on workman's comp. So typically we have seen some reserves left in that. We take about 1% of salary and benefits, and dedicate that towards the workman's comp. And that has, for many years, been sufficient enough to cover the workman's comp claims and that with a little bit of reserves. Over time, those reserves have dwindled as claims have increased, and 1% actually is below what many entities actually take as a percentage of payroll. So we should be looking at a higher percent, whether that be 1.5%, whatever that is. But if I can have the team just talk a little bit about what we're seeing in those trends and how maybe I've covered it with the depletion of our reserves, which now we've got to come in and help support that. That's where the transfers are coming into. For if you see in the out year next year, we're moving from a transfer to internal services of $1 million to $2.7 million, and that is because we have depleted that workman's comp reserve because of the increased claims. So going back to the legal conversation, we need to also look at that as an option too, to how do we resolve our workman's comp claims more expeditiously, or put in some stop gaps to ensure that those claims are not going for an extended period of time, but we can get people back to work safely. So if the team wants to add anything to that I missed.
I can add just one thing with that, and working with Ashley. We have a lot of claims that are not accommodated, right? So in the past, these claims were able to be accommodated, but when they're out of work claims, that's far more expensive, because we still have to have the function of the work being done here while also accommodating out of work. So that's another issue that's complicating the condition that we're in with that.
Yeah, Mr. Connor covered it, but so to his point, just over the last couple of years, my understanding is, and this would be something more that Ashley Ramadka could speak to, but that the doctors were able to increase the rates that they're charging for this. So that's what's also added to this cost. So we are going to be increasing the percentage that we take from payroll to 1.5% for next year. It's still not gonna, it's still gonna be a cost that's gonna have to happen. It'll just be mitigated through also other funding sources because it's, the people. So those that are hitting grants, the grants will pay their percentage instead of it being absorbed completely by general fund. But that's where we are now with the higher costs.
Thank you. I'm done.
I'm going to chime in a couple things and then I'll get to you, and we can keep going. I know this is a very important conversation. So, let me go back to, since we're on the workers' comp piece, I will just highlight that it's self-insured. There's trends that I think, one, there have been long tails that have been very costly, and trying to get them off of our books, basically, it's a liability that we're holding on to for year over year. And a few years ago, we did an analysis, and there, it's interesting, and I think it's very important, and I'm sure the team and maybe Ashley would be able to speak to this, because there are different nuances when it comes to workers' comp, what it shows. Obviously, there's a financial impact to it, but what we were trying to understand a couple years ago was, for example, we had a spike because there were more issues with behavioral issues that would result in a student or a staff member being harmed. So there are multiple prongs, and that is very important because these are all things. Again, there's certain variables that you can control, or you can drive behavior, or you can put stopgaps in place. I know that we currently don't. Our current insurance broker does not deal with our workers' compensation because we're self-insured. We have a claims adjuster. Yes, a claims adjuster. I don't recall who that is anymore. It used to be John Eastern. I know it's changed over the years. But I'm from speaking from the professional perspective that I did when I was in the insurance world, which was right in this space, we should be leaning on our broker to do an analysis of our workers' comp for the last 10, 15 years. And then, and still identify those cost drivers. What I think you'll find is, because and this is not new information, but the environment is such that there are more challenges when it comes to students and any kind of injury that may happen. That's one piece of it, but there are, and we have as a district taken action, whether it be training or what have you, to try to mitigate against that. But to me, because to do these analysis, it costs money, but I know brokers are always looking for, since that's not a area of work that they're currently covering, or asking other brokers to identify it. I know that in the brokerage world, that is, but they will do all the time from an analysis standpoint in an effort to earn business. So there would be no cost. I think we should absolutely be looking at that. And because one, it's highly regulated as a requirement, and certainly. And it's important also from a stability standpoint at our schools that we want to get people back to work, but we also need to make sure they're safe. So it'll tell a very interesting story. And I think, again, there's just some opportunity there to, one, we have to do something about it, but instead of, a lot of analysis costs money to hire some consultant come in. We don't want to do that, but I would encourage Mr. Connor to seek out some ideas where we would either ask our current broker or others to do an analysis and showcase those trends with predictive analytics. It is pretty incredible that you can drive down those costs. And I hope that, I'm sure we're doing some level of that, but because it's separated, I think there's significant opportunity there, and I would like to see us there. So that was just on the workers' comp. I do want to kind of walk through a couple things. First, yes, and I know we say this all the time, but it is so important. Krista, thank you for everything you do, and Gabby with your support. And I think each year is uniquely challenging, and I know we always say it is as if you have a crystal ball, but I think it's really important for the community because there have been headwinds when it comes to the education landscape and market for probably over a decade, and it has dramatically changed with the Florida Empowerment Scholarship. But even with that, and with revenues, our property values spiking double digits unexpectedly, and now it's the market's adjusting. So there's a lot of those nuances, and I know those are our external variables of which we have no control over. And you guys doing a tremendous job from a conservative standpoint, really so we aren't coming in too short. Now, I do understand that when it comes to enrollment, the state estimates the FES, and that is the Florida Empowerment Scholarship, as far as what those enrollments are. And what has occurred previously was lower than what was projected. Is that accurate?
Could you say that one more time?
Yeah, no worries. So because when you look at the various revenues coming in, or the projections, the state we are not able to put a projection in for the Florida Empowerment Scholarship.
That's correct.
It's the state. And what has happened, I think, maybe it was the first or second year, the projection was lower than what actually occurred. Is that
what actually ended up happening?
yes, which then created a financial hardship.
It was very close. It wasn't anything. There wasn't a big differential based on the actual enrollment versus what was projected in there. We had anticipated one time, but Krista, go ahead and share. Did you have the exact numbers?
Yeah, I can pull it up, but to your point, when it first started, we used to have to forecast it ourselves, and we kept forecasting it higher than they would, to your point, and then it would come in higher, and then we would bear the brunt of that, and then they started forecasting it. So I'd have to look and see, because it hasn't been too far off in the last year. They've been pretty good forecasting it, so, but I can get the exact
No,
numbers.
and it was more from a bigger picture of because we are so close to our fund reserve in the 7.54, which over the years I don't know if we've been that close, but when we have this date and time projecting where we're going, and I really want to reiterate the level of conservatism in that, so that we aren't blindsided as a district. And so that is a testament to you, your team, and really trying to navigate that. I do think, and Mr. Connor and I were talking about, it was hard because the marketplace has changed so dramatically. Even it was steady for a couple years with the expansion of school choice, charter schools, but now obviously it's no secret it's changed dramatically in the last couple years. It's just trying to make sure we're projecting in a way that we aren't having to borrow money for payroll. So that is a testament to, again, significantly having more of a conservative outlook. And then I do also believe things are stabilizing a little bit more, so maybe that makes it a little bit easier. But that said, I have to look at it from, there's enrollment, and that's that's obviously what brings FTE. And so what is it that we can do to continue to build enrollment, which we talk about constantly. I think that, again, I don't want to be redundant, but that is a key marker, and it's the thing that I know that Mr. Connor and the team have really focused on. And so that's something that's, I believe, we just will continue to have to do. But it is also the fixed cost. So when I looked at the presentation before today, you see the rising amount, the lineup of enrollment and revenue, and expenses, and then that change. And so when our enrollment's going down, but our expenses are going up, I think people from the public could say, well, why are you not adjusting it? But I appreciate you highlighting them, because it is the fixed costs that are on the external, well, I shouldn't say fixed costs, but they're the external market conditions when you say utilities or health insurance or a variety of other commodities that we have no direct control over. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay. So then I go to what can we control? And one question I have is, I know when we talk about the contracted services, we find that there are positions that are difficult to fill, and then we'll transfer from salaries then into contract services. Have we, and I don't need this answer now, but do we have a trend, like 5-year analysis of how much we've been spending and what those positions are and where they are?
Absolutely. In terms of capital, you're saying transferring over to capital?
No, I mean, like because maybe I misunderstood, but there are certain positions that are very difficult to fill, so therefore then we use
Yes.
contracted services. So where it goes from the salaries line, then it shifts over to
Yes.
contracted services. So from an aggregate, we don't really see that. We're looking at the budget from an aggregate standpoint. And I'm just curious because, one, we have to maneuver in real time, but some of these things can compound and end up being more costly, and then we have to look at, are we approaching it the right way? And so I'm just curious, have we looked at it from a contracted services? What are those positions? I have an idea what they are, but what are those positions, and where and what specific schools? I know, for example, there's special needs, and Oak Park would be one that since I've been a board member, that's nothing new. But have we done any kind of deeper dive? Is it kind of the same thing, or is it changed?
No, so it is the same. So
Okay.
most of those are going to be SLPs, OTs. So when we look at student services, we have a lot there. We do have some standing contracts for temporary staffing that we've done, but we really try not to use contracted services to the best of our abilities, right? In the capital side or the maintenance side or the construction side, there are some project managers, there are building code inspectors. Some of those hard to fill positions, while we advertise them, we may not be as competitive as the market is outside of our field. So we have difficulty sometimes in filling those positions with permanent employees. And so then that requires us to do some of the contracted services, and we typically do contracts not to exceed and use those services only as needed. We know at the last board meeting, we passed the full spectrum contract, which is RBTs and BCBAs to help to provide support there. And those, I believe, for us actually are a benefit to us in savings, because we're not having to hire necessarily those positions full-time, where others, where we just have hard-to-fill positions, we have to contract services. And so we do that very judiciously so that we're not overexpending, because yes, the hourly is typically going to cost us more if we contract services, depending on the position, right? Sometimes you get a savings because you're not having to pay the benefits. You may be paying them more hourly, but not having to pay the benefits. So Ashley, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yes, we are very intentional about that. Dr. Hutchinson and I have had many conversations over time about trying to drive that down. Right now, the majority of what we use that for are the SLP positions. And to Superintendent Connor's comment, there are some ESE positions that do have outside contracts, which are different than the staffing agency contracts. So those do tend to save us some money, and he could certainly speak to that with those contracts not having to pay benefits. The staffing agency contracts are where we have the markup, and that's where we really try to control those costs. Those positions do stay posted on our website. So even though we may have an individual with the staffing agency that is placed into an SLP or other position, we are constantly trying to recruit for that. So we do talk to the hiring managers, talk about the challenges that they're having in facing with candidates. We actually recently did a campaign to get some more SLPs, and I believe we had filled 8 positions through that means to try to reduce those. So the talent acquisition team is partnering with those hiring managers to come up with some targeted recruitment plans for those tough to fill positions to continue to try to drive those down.
I don't know if you wanted to add anything, but that makes me very excited. And I think that's really important because, again, we're looking at this from an aggregate, but there are so many nuances that play a significant role, not only from a financial standpoint, but also the stability and the level of service that we're able to provide. But what I think is really important, again, looking ahead, as Mrs. O'Day had also brought up a couple, couple months ago during another workshop when we talked about the trend of students K through 3, the rising percentages that are demonstrating our ESE population is increasing, and the needs for that. And so further conversations with members of the legislature, because to me, these are things that we do need to get ahead of. They do play a very big role. And so I just wanted to address that piece of it to understand. So you guys have your thumb on the scale and are evaluating regularly, not just the financial aspect, but also from the academic lens. So thank you for that. I will say that, so the TSIA, the teacher supplement that was highlighted as far as as a matter of legislation, and I had brought up recently about wanting to review our contract, because just from a matter of like a quick little going down memory lane here. The legislature years ago had put forward a legislation requiring a minimum starting salary for teachers. And each district had, I don't recall what the specific amount of time was, let's say it was like 3 or 5 years in order to meet that threshold. And this was probably it was like 6 years ago, I think, when that first began. Sarasota County met it, but then you deal with compression. And we have a major, so I obviously can't go into specific conversations that occurred during negotiations, but in general, the concern is that you have all of these teachers that are within, they've surpassed, they're not considered new teachers, they're outside of that 5-year realm, but they're kind of stagnant, because if we were doing across the board raises, it's just really, I mean, in my personal opinion, it really hurt our ability to be flexible, to retain the teachers that we need, that now have that experience, and that we need to keep them because just for natural attrition. So it's, to me, this, and I don't know, I was not obviously involved with this specific piece of legislation, but it appears to me it's as a mechanism to address that. And I think it's important for the public to understand that, because while ideally we want to have that control here at the local level where we can figure that out, but that's incumbent upon the contract. And across the board raises, again, and these are the hard conversations when you think about what we'll lead into after this, what Mr. Connor had said, like, you know, these aren't necessarily popular when we're looking about different revenue streams, whether it's fingerprinting or lunches or meal prices or what have you. There are a lot of difficult conversations that the school boards have to have. And when it comes to when we're negotiating, and I think back in the years prior, there's always the desire to pay our staff as much as we possibly can. I mean, that is because you believe in the work that they're doing. At the same time, we have a fiduciary responsibility because you don't know what the future is. So when you're adding on top every year, when it's on the base salary versus it being what we call supplements, which in the normal world is like a bonus or a one-time payment, it really has compounded and created a much more challenging situation. So it's interesting that I find ourselves where I don't know what that calculation is. I think if I understood when we had the legislative update, our district, I believe we're farther along than other districts so that we wouldn't be getting as much of that money, or how are they allocating? How's the state allocating the TSIA? Do we know? Or is that Mr. Front? Or is that Terry?
They have a specific formula that they give to each school district based on the number of teachers, and you want to?
Yeah, it's prescriptive. It's listed out in the FP. Even though it's a part of the overall allocation that they give you, they do outline it in that and tell you exactly how much you have to spend. But to your point, we have met the obligation of that minimum threshold, so that does change things for us.
So whereas another district may have not quite met it and they may get more, is that right? They would maybe.
They have to focus a little bit differently than we do. Yeah, to your point, because we have met that.
It is real important to understand it's not an additional amount of money.
Right.
It is how they allocate the current dollars you already are receiving, and that is earmarked for TSIA. So it is part of your FEFP dollars.
Understood.
Yeah.
But I think that's important because, again, a lot of it is driven by, well, the way I see it is that to address the issue that I from the compression piece, and that other districts may not have had the great leadership or team from the finance team to really push us, because I know Mrs. Corcoran, who is a former CFO, I mean, many conversations were about how to lift that teacher salary and how to also manage all of the other elements, but certainly then you also have when it's across the board, those percentages, I mean, those are they become very difficult to sustain. And so I think that it's important anytime we have these conversations, and for future board members, that they are hard, and so it's fun to do, but feels good right now, but it can also create a very painful situation in the future. And so I think that is just a part I wanted to highlight. When I move into let me see, I have one more thing, and then, no, I did expect services. So when it comes to, Mrs. Barker kind of touched on this, and so I don't want to be too redundant, but I do think it's important. So we have, shout out to former board member, Mr. Kovac, because I think it's really important. The 7.5% fund balance policy, while it can be stressful for a superintendent in a moment like this, I think it is incredibly important because when you consider how much operational days 3%, which is the minimum for the state, will provide you, is not much. And what happens is then you have to borrow money, which you're paying interest on. So it's actually, it is not good fiscal practices for taxpayers. So with that, when we look into, as you mentioned, we're tight, and we have gone through every avenue of which we can. We do zero-based budgeting in areas that we can. Mr. Connor started with that. Can you dive a little bit more into that? Because I want to make sure the community understands that.
Yeah, so a part of every year, what we do is each department obviously has some obligations that they have to meet financially. And a part of our process with the finance team and the executive team is to look line by line, what are those projected expenditures that you're planning for? We do look historically to see, but we don't copy and paste. We don't just say, oh, I budgeted 20 grand for this last year and I just roll it right over. That's not the practice that you want to do, because that's not true zero-based budgeting. So we look at what are historically responsible for within your department that may be a recurring cost each and every year. Sometimes those things have to be increased, obviously, as inflation and costs rise. We have to look at making those increases to align with that, as well as, do they align to the priorities? The priorities of the board, the priorities of a strategic plan, are they things that are must-haves or nice-to-haves? All of that is a part of a process, and then it eventually rolls up through the finance team, myself included, and we look at every line item within that department request. So things that we're very tuned into is we're not going to be doing a lot of out-of-county travel. Nobody's going off to conferences unless there are the state mandated, or I should say the state-sponsored ones. State-sponsored conferences are very important because they give you the legislative updates, any rule amendments, all of those things are very important for our team. But going to a national conference to learn something, that may be off the table, right? Those are things that we scrutinize very, very clearly. We have looked at things like, one of the things too around the leasing of district vehicles, actually using capital expenditures to lease these vehicles so that we can reduce the amount of mileage reimbursements off general fund. That's a strategy that we employ because we want to, obviously we know that we don't have endless amounts of money in our capital fund, but the fact is, it is more strategic to use a leasing program with our district vehicles, and some employees would have to reimburse a lot of mileage because they're going to school each and every day. And at 72 cents a mile, that can rack up a lot of money over the course of several months, and then of course several employees doing that. So those are the types of things that we look at in the ZBB process, the zero-based budgeting process, to ensure that everything is accounted for, and that there is not an expense that is relatively not an essential expense versus what's really essential. And so that process not only happens at the beginning of the year, there is a review of that quarterly as we move through the year to make sure what adjustments do we need. I meet every few weeks with the budget team to see what of our projections look like, how are we trending. As you can see, we did very well in our overall expenditures based on what we appropriated for the year. We came in well under our budget. The problem was revenue fell short, and that's where we got stuck a little bit there. But that was out of our control. And so that process is ongoing throughout the year.
Thank you for that. And the reason that, because I know a lot of districts really kind of they operate under the status quo budgeting process. And I know when we moved over to zero-based budgeting, it took a couple years. And so, but it's a practice that we have had in place in Sarasota County, and it is vitally important when you look at things being as close as they are now. So I appreciate you identifying that. And I will end at the enrollment piece, which is why I am excited to continue having all those conversations, whether it be a district managed charter. I know those conversations have been discussed. There are, as Mrs. O'Day had mentioned, instead of, we're not creating a new necessarily school, but evaluating, is there another opportunity with existing schools that maybe have lower enrollment that could be reimagined? And I think there's some really exciting conversations down the pipe. So I support that. I'm excited about that. And I look forward to those conversations because, as I said, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the enrollment. What is it going to take to bring people to Sarasota County schools? I love the choice approach by making it an ongoing. I know that's not necessarily easy from a staffing standpoint, but I think that it's been demonstrated that you can pivot and respond. And I think that is a winning approach for any family to know that, oh no, if they're not happy with wherever they are, we still have an opportunity for them here, because it does happen. And while I personally think it's the best, ideally, for a student to try to have that continuity. If they're in a situation or a place that is just not allowing them to thrive or the families don't support, I love that we'll have the doors open for them. So I appreciate all the work. I know it was a long-winded questions, but I took down all those notes. I know we still have more to discuss. Mrs. Marinelli, you've been waiting. I apologize. Thank you.
No, that's fine. I just have a few more questions that were triggered by other board members' questions or comments. On the charter schools, I know with law enforcement, the SROs, that they're contracting and they're paying full cost, so that's no cost to the district. Are there other services that charter schools contract, like, well, food and nutrition, but I'm talking, they used to, psychologists, social workers, some of those real essential student support. Do we have any of that still going on? And because the reason I'm asking, we're already getting into where charters are contracting with us for big areas. So it might just lend itself as we go down that road of having some district-managed charters that were already there part of the way anyway. So are they still utilizing our student services supports?
They do to some degree. We do have a kind of a set schedule of any reimbursements if we are working kind of outside of what the current agreements state. So things like evaluations from psychologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, primarily falling with those areas, and when it comes to evaluations of students at the charter schools.
And are we keeping up with I don't want to gouge by any means, I want to be fair, but are we keeping up with our contracted services of what we are charging?
We do, actually.
Okay.
We worked last year with our, last school year with our finance team to make sure that we were in line with what applicable kind of comparative rates would be.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
For that one. With the workman's comp, and I know, which I'm sure the answer is yes, but I'm just going to ask, between instructional and classified with the workman's comp, identifying where most of the workman comps, they're being filed, and if you've identified certain areas, is there training? I know with behavior and teachers, I know how that is, because that's always been a big issue, and but the other areas, identifying and then possibly offering trainings, so.
Yes,
Somebody next.
yes. Yes, and I apologize, I missed the first part of it, I wasn't here, so it came down. So yes, one of the things that Lynn Peterson and I have been working on over the past year is really to focus on this area. We have seen this growing. It's not necessarily the number of cases from year to year in workers' compensation claims. Those remain about the same. It's really the length of time that they're out that's driving up our claims. And there's only so many things we can do about that, because some of that's based upon the doctor's release and what they're saying, and based upon that post-treatment plan. So yes, we are putting plans and parameters in place. Yes, we are looking at light duty programs. I know that was mentioned as I was walking over here. And we're trying to focus on a plan to prevent that. I know you had asked earlier about an separate review and analysis of that. So those are things that we're working on to try to control some of those workers' compensation costs and to keep people working, because data shows that if they're coming to work, they're in the mindset to continue coming to work, so they're not losing that space where they would normally be in a routine and a pattern, whereas sitting at home. So we are putting a lot of plans and parameters in place. You'll see some of these within the next month or so to support that.
Okay, thank you very much. And then on our union negotiations, we are in very challenging times, and I don't see that easing up anytime soon. So when it comes to negotiations, I think we have to look at negotiations differently and be approached, and that's going to be a very difficult thing, because we have a very strong union, and we don't want to lose teachers. We want to retain the teachers, the new ones, because they're the lifeblood because people are retiring, and then we have that whole compression area. It's not just a simple thing, but we need to negotiate differently, and they need to meet us halfway, because we can't keep doing the negotiations the way they've been done, because times have really, really changed. And that only makes them stronger to help when we're all working together to address these issues. So who's ever on that negotiation, I know I never wanted to be. That and the calendar. Those are two areas I never wanted to be a part of. And then I just want to clarify, because I know how certain individuals like to take something that I say. When I made reference to we need to watch what certain teachers, especially in our high schools, I want it to be known that 99.9% of our teachers give everything appropriately, but it's that little 1% that people focus on that we have to address. So I don't want it out there that Mayor Nelly says teachers are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Yes, they are. It's a very small percentage, but that's what gets all the attention. So I don't want people to be putting words in my mouth, but I know they will. But at least if anybody bothers to listen, it's on the record. So thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Rose.
Thank you, Mrs. Ziegler. Given this was an incredibly worthy review of the budget, I'm going to ask Superintendent Connor to talk about one piece again for the folks in the back of the room, given the rhetoric that is out in the community, and particularly for the media. There's been a lot of commentary on the budget, the budgeting process and practices. And I want to accentuate once again the focus on academic achievement, the tight systems that didn't exist for several years prior to your arrival. But given all that, I'm going to ask you to once again address the cuts in the district administration relative to staff at large in the district and how those compare. I think that's a real important piece that we can't say enough for the community, the media, and those that are sharing commentary that isn't accurate.
Sure. As shared at our last workshop, it's real important to know that every one of our positions have a specific purpose, a value, and even in times when, the last 6 years, we have added some temporary positions on temporary funding, those served a purpose and they fulfilled a need. And unfortunately, some of those positions came to a point, an expiration date, because the revenue tied to that position was not going to continue. And we have reached that point in time, right? And so as we looked at the budget, and we know that the majority of our general fund makes up salaries and benefits, as you can see through this presentation today, that you can strip back as much as you can on the non-salaried expenditures, but it can only get you so far. And so, unfortunately, what you have to do in times like this is take a real close look at every position. And it's not to state that a position is not valuable, it's not worthy, but we have to look at each of those things to say, what can we prioritize moving forward, aligned to our goals as a school board and a school district to fulfill the mission. And so we definitely want to make sure that every position, every category of position bears that burden as equitably as other categories. And what I mean by that is that we're not cutting all teachers, we're not cutting all support staff, or we're not cutting all administrators, right? But that we're sharing that load. And when we did that, we came with that lens specifically in these reductions. And from a district perspective, there were 100 at the beginning of the year. Or going into next year, we have 126 administrative positions, which makes up less than 4% of our entire, or 2% of our entire cohort. 4% would be all administrators, inclusive of our school base. So there's 126 administrators going into the 26-27 year. That is a reduction of 20 positions from this current school year, which equates, when you add the summer reductions, back in 2025, when we began this process, we cut 12 administrative positions. A totality of 32 district administrative positions equates to nearly a quarter, 1/4 of our district administration. That's how many positions were reduced from the district admin category. In our school-based category, we made slight increases because of the addition of Welland Park High School. We had to add our assistant principals there. We had already budgeted for the principal a year in advance, right? We already had that in the budget. And Mr. Grbacher's doing an awesome job of getting that school ready, and he spent that entire year just doing a phenomenal job of really setting the school up for success. So a very slight increase of 3 administrators for Welland Park, but overall, that is a significant reduction if you take district and school-based, a very significant reduction compared to what we had to. Now, sheer numbers of our teacher instructional positions are higher, but that is because the cohort is 3,000 compared to the hundreds of administrators. So we reduced 191 instructional, that could be classroom and non-classroom. Most of that was non-classroom positions. Those things could have been interventionists, could have been literacy coaches, things that were outside of the classroom. And then, of course, we have to monitor class size. And we are not afforded the opportunity with the as you can see, the revenue is dwindling year after year after year. It just continues to shrink. So we have to be judicious by looking at making sure class sizes are reasonable. We would love to have the lowest class size, and we do. When you look at the statewide average, we fall below the state average in class size. But we had to tick that up by an average of 1 in each of our schools. So now going into this year, our average class size will rise from 15 to nearly 16, not even 16, it'll be less than that. And so we're still having very reasonable class sizes, and that did reduce some of the classroom instructional positions as well. And so we got into a position where we did have some surplus instructional staff, meaning going into the 26-27 school year, we had this amount of positions, we had more staff on our roles than positions. Those 136 positions were given notification that contracts could potentially end if there was not a position that opened up. Right now, we have reduced that down to under 60, or we're under 60, 59 as of today. So we've gone from 136 positions on the surplus list. Today, we are at 59. We're continuing every day as attrition occurs to dwindle that number down so that everyone who was affected by that surplusing process hopefully will be landing in a nice position within the school district. But the totality of those cuts roughly are about 7% in the classroom teaching instructional category, as well as classified as a little lower than that. So, when you look at a 7% reduction of that category to 25%, that speaks to us really making sure that we knew that the district administrative level was going to carry the burden too as well. And it's unfortunate because even those district administrative positions, as much as people may want to say, are they valuable? They are valuable. They are very valuable. But we're going to be leaner, we're going to be more efficient, and we're going to work because this is the times that we live in. So does that answer your question?
Yes, and the comparison of percentage of cuts at the district level as to the percentage at large, you had spoke to that previously, those two data pieces.
Yep, so 22% at the district level compared to at large, about a straight across the board is around 7%.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for that. And I also, I want to be sensitive because I know board members, since we did call this as a special meeting, and I know a few of you had I don't know if it's an 11 or 11:30 stop, and that's why I wanted to start at 9, because as you can see, this is an important conversation. There's lots of wanting to ensure we provide ample opportunity to go through it. I want to highlight one more piece and then go into the revenue generation discussion is another element that has changed that I think is important. And one, I want to underscore what Mr. Connor just said is the administrative staff. I think it's an easy hit publicly to make it sound like it's bloated, but it's lean. And something Mr. Connor did, which I had been advocating for a very long time, was putting caps on the administrative salary positions, because every time we would go into negotiation, the negotiation for under the bargaining unit would just mirror over to administration, and that's costly again because some of these are higher end paid positions and they work very, very hard. But I think a lot of adjustments have been made, but the elements in the work is being, we could see it, as Mrs. Barker said, like, do you guys even sleep? The work that you guys do is critical. And the work that has been done in the last 2.5 years with those adjustments, it's hard because it's asking a lot of people while also putting in financial controls, which can be misperceived, but we have the responsibility from the fiduciary standpoint, but also asking a lot of staff. So I just want to applaud all of you for what you guys do, because I think, as has been said, the systems being put in place are allowing the continuation and of focus beyond academic achievement, and the outcomes are proving to underscore the great work that's happening. And the more that we're able to do that is in a way that we will continue to build enrollment. The one concern is always this, and this is, I'm sure all of us have our own individual conversations with Mr. Connor, but the sustainability about not only, if I go back and to my point before Mr. Connor was here, but just when I was talking about prior negotiations and such, and the reality is we have to look at the sustainability of any of these decisions. And at the same time, now that we're trying to adjust to not only market conditions, but the financial conditions, we can't lose our sight and on the academic supports that we, as you noted, and rightfully so, they all did serve a purpose. It's just, again, it's the sustainability of it. And so whatever we can do by means of policy that doesn't constrain a superintendent, but has those, checks and balances in place so that future boards, may not have the historical knowledge, but, and we don't find ourselves making the same hard situations, making them harder, I should say. So I really do appreciate that, and I think it's very important to underscore the positions and the decisions that have taken place to really put some controls in order. But whatever we can do to make sure we see, so that we keep a good monitor on the academic piece as we pull or ask more of staff. It's gonna be a lot, and I don't think it's lost on any of us. So I do appreciate that and note that, and I know you have your work cut out for you to evaluate that regularly. All right, now, unless there are any other additional on that, but we can pivot over to the revenue generation discussion. Mr. Connor, if you want to lead us through that.
Yeah, so I know this was a special call workshop, so we haven't had a lot of opportunity to maybe study ahead of time, and I did provide today for your review 4 areas that we can consider. These are not obviously very significant, but like I said, every dollar matters. And some of this is cost deferral and then generating some revenue to help support our schools. So as we live in these tight times, the things that I'm thinking around is everything that is within our control. One of those being is our facility rentals and how we go about doing that. Looking at our facility rental rates as compared to the average rates of districts that are comparable here in Florida. I think there is opportunity for us to look at making some adjustments to our Facilitron rental rate agreement. And so looking at things like how we compare when we rent out our parking lots or our media centers or our gyms, our cafeterias, our kitchens, our auditoriums, all of these come with a standardized rate that we set in our Facilitron software. That's how we kind of program and we monitor and operate our rentals throughout the school district. When you look at the average rates across districts in Florida, and we specifically looked at Orange County, Broward County, Brevard County, Seminole County, we saw that we are very competitive. We're actually doing, our rates are very, very low, but maybe to our disadvantage, right? And so those are things that we want to, not today necessarily, but look at in the future at a workshop about how we could go about adjusting those rates to be more comparable so that we are maximizing our abilities to generate revenue, cover the cost, obviously, for cleanup and custodial services and turning on the lights and the AC in these places and making sure that we're meeting that demand. So again, those are all different areas that we see the larger parts of our schools, like the gyms and the media centers and the auditoriums. There is a lot of opportunity there. The second one would be fingerprinting. I don't know that many people understand that there is a Florida law that requires all school districts now to transition our employees from the FDLE system to the new AHCA clearinghouse. And that has come at a very significant cost. And so I have our team here, Chief, our Mr. Overbay, if you just want to briefly talk about a little bit of where we've been through that process over the last 2 years, and then address some of the costs there.
So thank you, board member. I'll go ahead and I'll kind of break it down. I know that from being on the before, we always have talked about the fingerprinting costs, especially with the level 2, level 1, and what we're doing. Ultimately, the state they ended up changing what's called ACA from FDLE to ACA. It's still going to the FDLE database, but every single employee has to be fingerprinted and put into the ACA database by June of 2027. With that, it costs $60 for that fingerprint to be that we pay as a district. All current employees who get hired since the beginning of the school year, they pay the $60 out of their pocket. It goes in. But all current employees obviously that have been hired outside of when they transitioned has to go into the ACA database, and the district is paying that $60. So as an example, we still have about 4,365 employees at $60 a piece. So that comes out to $261,900 a district. Ultimately, our cost would be over $300,000, which was the mandated thing from the state of Florida. So obviously, one of the things is moving forward is, just to keep you in the loop, that's ultimately is the cost. There's nothing to get around that. It's what the state charges us per printing, which is the $60 we're paying it for all current employees. Secondly, we get to the level 2 volunteers, and this is where we had the discussion previously. With everything, personnel costs, what it costs us for the equipment and everything, it's costing us about $102 for every level 2 volunteer. The difference between a level 1 and a level 2, a level 1, you can come in, but you have to be supervised the whole entire time you're around there by a staff member. A level 2, then you can stay by yourself. So on the level 2, we're looking at $100 per person, and we're only collecting $30. As an example, Manatee collects $90. Charlotte County has a range, but they collect up to $95 per. So we're at $102, so we're working at a loss of $64 for every single level 2 volunteer that comes into the district. Now, however you look at that and you push that forward is obviously whatever the loss is going to be to the district. We're still compiling the 25-26 rate and get those to you exactly what we ended up. But ultimately, it's a significant loss to the district. On the level 1s, that's anybody who wants to come in. That could be anybody from helping in the library to just about anything that you come on there to do. That goes through, we use Raptor. Through the Raptor system, we have a third-party vendor through Raptor that ultimately charges, and it's $5 a person. And we collect no revenue in regarding to any level 1 volunteer that comes in. So you can extrapolate the numbers, $5 times X amount of 1,000 volunteers, $64 times X amount of level 2 volunteers. And then, of course, the one thing that, as the district is the ACA, which we have to have by June, and we still have about 4,300 employees that still need to be fingerprinted. We're going out to sites to also to get them, to make it easier for them. But when you come into it, we've had, and I've had conversations with Gabby at multiple times this year, because as it's like, well, here's another fingerprinting fee, here's another fingerprinting fee, here's another fingerprinting fee. And when you start adding it up, it's $300,000, $400,000 plus that we're, as a district, as we're subsidizing fingerprinting. So that's kind of as an overview of where we are with that, which would be up to the board of whether or not, in regarding to the ACA, and then regarding to the level 2, and then regarding to the level 1, and that's ultimately the overview on the fingerprinting costs for the district.
Thank you, sir. The next one is our activity fees. So these are for mainly our non-enrolled student participation. So the Florida Senate Bill 538 now authorizes public schools to assess an activity fee to students who are not enrolled full-time at the school but participate in school-sponsored activities. So that would be students like private school students or charter school students. The law has a maximum fee allowed of $400 per participating sport. And so we could be looking at an option of how we go about assessing that. We looked at our data. We had roughly 200 students that participated outside of our enrolled schools into our athletics. And while that's not a huge amount of fee, again, every opportunity that we look for in terms of how we go about generating revenue is something that we should at least explore and talk about. Those fees could cover things like transportation, looking at security, uniforms and equipment, the maintenance of our courts, and the officials and the umpire cost. All those operational costs are related activities is definitely something that we see an increase just about every year. You know, the cost to have our officials just continues to increase. Security costs continue to increase. So what you have probably seen around the state, Pinellas County is actually now charging a fee for every student to participate in their middle school and high school. Polk County now will be charging their non-district students into this fee. If one limitation is if you are homeschooled, there is not the ability to charge those students unless you charge all students this. So there are a couple of options we can look at. We could have a flat fee for participation for every student in our school district who participates in sports. It could be a nominal fee. Maybe it's a maximum fee if you are in multiple sports, or maybe it's a maximum if you have more than one child. We could look at an option of only charging charter and private schools who are not in our traditional public schools. And so as we look at different counties and what they're doing, we're monitoring that very closely. One of the things Manatee County is doing is they're doing a $75 participation / tryout fee for football. And they're doing a one-time $50 participation tryout fee for all other sports. So again, we can structure this in many different ways if we would like to explore this into the future. And lastly, the big one here would be our student meal price proposal and what we're looking at. So as we did comparisons to other school districts, obviously we have a lot of cost drivers. So if you look at the increase in salaries of our food service assistants and our cafeteria management over the last decade, we've seen almost 100% increases in salaries and benefits, not to even include the food and supply cost increases that have occurred just since 2020. We've seen upwards of some being 50% increases to over 140% increases depending on the food item. So you saw in the proposed budget that we will be transferring money next year. We did $1 million this year. We're looking at doing another $400,000 going into next year because these costs have just gotten to a point where they're not able to fully subsidize their cost with the meal prices as they currently exist. So our current prices for breakfast at elementary is $225, middle school and high school as well. And then our lunch prices are $325 at elementary and $375 for middle and high school. We could propose a increase to that where we could go to $250 for breakfast. We could look at a elementary lunch price of $365 and a secondary price of $415. And that would put us in comparison to our neighboring school districts. If you see on the one pager, we did that cost and what it looks like. And that does put us still well within the range of Charlotte County, Seminole, Manatee, and Pasco for breakfast and for lunch. But the bottom line is our projected fund balance is continuing to dwindle as it currently exists. You know, we have talked about are there the ability to offer positions maybe with reduced amount of benefits, Some people do take those jobs because of the benefits, but could we offer part-time positions where we pay an hourly rate, but not necessarily the benefits? And I don't know if that would be attractive enough, but it would definitely be a cost savings because we do spend so much in that particular area. But there are a lot of cost-saving efforts to look for and discuss as we continue down this path of finding ways to generate revenue. So these are just 4 things that are for consideration. I know it's a lot of information here, but at least we can, at the board's direction, I could bring forth further discussion, future workshops. Now, I will say, if we wanted to do the student participation in athletic fees, we need to have that done before school starts. That's by law. It's actually July 1st if we're only going to charge private and charter schools. But if we do apply a fee to all of our students, we just need to have that done prior to school starting. So we would need to vote on that rather quickly if that is the case.
Well, you weren't you weren't wrong when you said these aren't popular. I don't like any of them, and I don't. I will say, for me, and I recognize that the pinch that we're in from a financial standpoint, and so I applaud the creative ideas. My concern is there could be unforeseen consequences too. I think, the fingerprinting piece, and I want to dive into those numbers a little bit more, but there's just, in my mind, such a risk when it comes to both from an employment opportunity and to open the door for people to seek out employment here and asking for them to expend dollars, but also from a volunteer standpoint. To me, I think it's such a great opportunity for us to continue to build the community around our schools, and by letting them come in and support, so I have heartburn on that, and I'm quite frankly all of them. And the same would be when it comes to sports. I think they play such a vital role for so many students, and I think that it being involved in a sport, regardless of a fee, is always already a financial challenge, and wanting to ensure that that's still accessible to all students, because it really can be a game changer. And it also may be a great opportunity, again, for families to be introduced to Sarasota County schools. And I don't know how many charters and homeschool and or private students, I'd like to see if we can get that information, that currently participate in our sports programs, just because I don't have any concept of what that volume is. And I just worry that it's kind of, penny wine, pound foolish kind of situation of that could hamper. It could be we could be something that offers more than other districts and be more enticing to families, so that we can, again, if you go back to the very beginning of this conversation, enrollment is the key. And I worry that would hamper it. I know that they're, so those are my 2 concerns with those. The Facilitron piece and the meals, I would be more inclined to have a conversation about that, but I think there's more data that I need on the other ones. Mrs. Rose.
Thank you, Mrs. Ziegler. I think it's important to discuss the ALICE report, which is put out by United Way, and it's earmarks data on families that have limited assets, and those families in Sarasota County have grown by 139%, establishing that 108,000 salary that a family brings in is the cutoff. So this quite challenging, this conversation. And from my own individual perspective, I focus in on the child and the family and the services that we're providing and that quality. At the same time, I understand the competitive dynamics of strengthening our budget, but I'm not coming up with a simple answer, particularly relative to that ALICE report. I think that this is going to take a deeper dive. When I look at facility rentals, that's something I think that we need to be individually in the market frame with, and I'm okay with that, or how we level that and compensate other areas. Meal prices being in line with other districts where we're edging it, but at the same time, how does that impact how does free and reduced lunch correlate to that Alice report? Is there a group of families that are going to be without? That's unacceptable. This last page is quite complex. Fingerprinting, I would be inclined to venture into the nonprofit world. Where is the nonprofit world willing to step up and step in, which they always have and want to, and ask how they can help? Would there be a willingness for a nonprofit partnership? So to me, this is going to take a lot. My own individual input is to take a lot. I don't think we can bear the price of that cost of fingerprinting at the same time. That's a vital component. But I think in the arena of Sarasota County, there's ways to approach these pieces rapidly. That's needed. Sports participation, I consider to be the quality of customer service. That's a tough one for me, and development of the child and a component. But there's some areas that I would individually be willing to work in, some brainstorming that needs to occur. And I think the Alice report, once been put out 2026 just recently by United Way, is extraordinarily impactful in this conversation when it comes to meal prices. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Barker.
Thank you. I really appreciate your comment about the ASH report, Mrs. Rose. Thank you for bringing that up. That was something that I had thought about too. I have maybe a slightly different perspective when it comes to fingerprinting. I agree. I don't want to discourage volunteers from joining us. I think that's an incredibly important part of a vibrant school system. But I did notice that the loss per level 2 volunteer is $64 that we incur, and the loss per employee is $60. So I would at least be interested in bumping it, making those two things even. I don't think we should incur a higher cost for a volunteer than we do an employee. It's only going to save us a couple bucks, but that makes logical sense to me. And then with regard to the Facilitron, I was just wondering, the benchmark districts, 2 of them are quite large, Howard and Orange. And so I would be curious to know maybe Seminole is very similar to us, but maybe what are our neighboring districts, if we could look at Manatee and Charlotte. I just want to make sure that our benchmarks are appropriate for our enrollment and our placement in the state. And then with activity fees, I absolutely, love actually that homeschool children, private school children can come and participate in these, when I sign my children up for soccer or softball or whatever it is that they do, there is certainly a fee for that, and it increases every year, dance, whatever. And so I don't think it's unfair to expect that students who don't attend our schools pay some sort of fee. $400 seems a little bit costly, but I don't know, what, $250, $300? I don't want to dismiss that out of hand. It seems if we're moving, which the state seems to be pushing us into this marketplace approach, then we do have to participate in the marketplace. So that's my only thought about the activities fees. I would like to have a continued conversation, not just a, snap judgment, but I think it's worth the conversation. Fair?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Just a point on the benchmark comparisons too, when it comes to Facilitron, just making sure too that not only is it just regional, but that you're looking at facilities that are similar to what we have, right? Some districts don't even have auditoriums. And so we want to make sure we make the right comparisons there.
Yeah, that was good. That was also where I was thinking, just even for the quality of it. And then you have on the flip side, there's some nuance to consider, and I do recognize, and I think we have, I think either between one-on-ones, I think a lot of great components were brought up here. I think creatively identifying partners that may be able to support some of these areas, I think it shouldn't be off the table either. But I would argue that, I would suggest that in our next workshop, we really hammer this out so that there's, in one-on-ones have further conversations and some ideas and brainstorming sessions, be able to, discuss it in more depth at our next workshop. So maybe a longer one, and that's okay. And then, which would give that time frame if make that decision. And then it would also be public and provide ample time and awareness to the public. But Mrs. Marinelli, I'm sorry, you're recognized here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think for me, increasing the meals, that's a tough one, because I remember not too long ago we increased, and that caused a lot of angst. But I'm not against any of it, but I just think it needs to, like we said, have a lot more discussion. What I feel the best of charging the fees is our facilities, because when you look at our facilities, who wouldn't want to use them? Whether it's our parking lots, you don't have potholes, you don't have all the other things that, other parking lots have. Look at our auditoriums. So I think, I don't want to gouge anybody, but I think if you want to use our facilities because they're excellent, then we need to charge appropriately for them. The sports, I know we're just talking about Florida and moving into that marketplace, which I don't really like that term, but other states have been charging for sports and things for years and years and years. So for me, if we charge for, I would like it to be minimal, but to make sure with the free and reduced lunch kids that they are not locked out of that there is the scholarship or the monies for them, because that does save lives and opens up major opportunities for them when they possibly graduate. So I think there's things we can do. The one I don't have really the problem is the facilities. The rest would take more discussion, but I'm not close to them. Thank you.
I have a question when it comes to, we were talking about scholarship and being a provider at means. Is that extended to sports or no? Interesting. Okay. So it's only for academic services.
Yep. But this opens up an opportunity for us.
Agreed.
Right.
And the facility piece, we've invested, when you go to any other districts, it's pretty profound. We do a great job, but it's come at the investment and to our taxpayers, right? So continued conversation, and I think there's lots of ideas among us and that we can discuss with the superintendent and then add to the next workshop to have a more clear kind of idea and recommendation to move forward.
Absolutely. The only one thing I'll add before we close is we'll do need to meet on short order around negotiation. We'll need to have executive session because we're on the clock. By July 15th, we must begin negotiations for the TSIA allocation. So we'll need to go ahead and schedule some executive sessions for that.
Sounds good. Mrs. Barker, you had a question?
Just quickly, for the activity fees, do we need to make that decision before July 1st?
If we were only considering doing it for private and charter schools, if we want to explore the idea of charging a fee for all students, then we can do it before the school year starts. It does put us, this law just passed, right? So we're in a little bit of a pickle in terms of trying to get it in for this year if we only want to do charters and private. So we don't have to look at it for this year if that's the case. If we can't turn around and you want to have an approval before July 1st, just that. Or if the board is more in line with looking at a fee and considering obviously free and reduced lunch and hardships of that nature, what we could do, we have a little bit more runway for that. So I'll turn over to the chair to maybe if you want to.
So I think, because I have absolutely no concept of how many charter / and private students, so from a revenue standpoint.
Well, inclusive of homeschool, we had about 200.
Sorry, is it home, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we can tease out those numbers. Do you have it? Yeah, no. All right, so we have 200 we know between private, charter, and homeschool.
Okay.
So I don't know, we'll have to tease that out.
Because that would be kind of to rush to do it, or have it
Yeah.
the level mind of, is that substantial enough in every?
Yeah, honestly, you think about it. If you did, let's just say it was 200 at 4, and you did the maximum you could do at 400 for one sport, you're looking at what, $8,000, $80,000?
And right now we don't charge, and right now, this, taking choice families out of it, the district, what do we do currently? We charge nothing.
Do not charge anything.
That's what I need clarity. Okay. And that's, okay.
So essentially it's an $80,000 maximum, right? That's if all 200 were private and charters. We don't believe that to be the case.
Versus
So-
a more strategic conversation across the board
Right.
and not being as rushed. Not that it's like we don't have all the time in the world, but, so
I would recommend we not look at the private charters for this year. And if we want to discuss maybe something for all students, we can do that. I'll talk to you during your one-on-ones about whether that's the appetite. And then we can go from there.
yeah, I think I don't like the idea of doing a rush. I don't know if that, but I would rather have a holistic approach. But I do think that we'll have a workshop in that time frame. I don't necessarily think we'd have to, but if we had to call a special meeting to meet that threshold, but I mean, that's really where.
I'm comfortable with waiting. That's not a problem. I just don't want to dismiss it out of hand. I
Yep.
think it does deserve a larger conversation.
Agreed. Well, I appreciate everyone making their time today. I appreciate the work that you guys have done, do all year. And I know, again, this was a late legislative session conclusion, and there's a lot of changes. But again, each time we have faced a challenge, I feel like we are on the, we've improved in so many areas. So the challenge ends up being worth it. I'm sure many people would prefer to have less long nights and gray hairs and wrinkles, but I really do appreciate the focus and being emphasized, because I do think that the team in place is up to the challenge, and we'll just keep pushing ahead. So thank you very much for that. Mr. Connor, is there anything that you need from a direction standpoint by the board at this time?
No, I appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
All right, well, if there are no additional comments, we are going to conclude, and I lost my cheat sheet again. I saw just too many pieces of paper here. Our next monthly work session, which sounds like it'll be a busy one, is July 14th, and the next regular board meeting is Tuesday, July 21st, and which will include the vote of the advertisement of the tentative budget. The public hearing to adopt tentative millage and budget meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, July 28th at 5:01 p.m. If no one else has any comments, we are adjourned. Thank you, guys.